Order the New Hampshire House of Representatives Special Committee on the COVID Response Efficacy. Let's open with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. So I'd like to start off by reading the mission statement that we have for this special committee. This bipartisan committee is tasked with investigating and evaluating the state's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on the New Hampshire healthcare system. The committee will function in a science-based, fact-finding review specifically acquiring comprehensive, accurate data and all related information pertaining thereto. Areas of particular focus will include the administration of federal guidance, acceptance of federal funds, and implementation of emergency use authorization vaccination efforts. The committee issued a report documenting their findings and recommendations from the public hearings held in 2024. This report identified additional areas to be investigated, such as the ongoing pandemic responses within the New Hampshire healthcare system. Other areas needing investigation include long COVID treatment, the implementation of the New Hampshire Patient Bill of Rights, and vaccination policies. Follow-up reports will be issued to supplement the original findings and recommendations with additional information. All right. To start off today's discussion, I'd like to note that last time there were a few things introduced. We talked about the U.S. Supreme Court not hearing a Los Angeles schools COVID vaccine case. A lot of that, I believe, was attributable to the change in policies, and the impact had already been mitigated. And so I think at this time, the U.S. Supreme Court decided not to hear anything relevant to that. There was also an article where talking about the CDC internal emails admit COVID-19 vaccine risks were never acknowledged publicly. And so those were provided at our previous meeting. Representative Polzoff also provided a detailed statement talking about different opportunities and actions that might be taken, and we'll hear more on that today. I'd like to follow up with a couple of new pieces of information, at least new to this committee. If you've read the index of the previous that our research assistant had previously sent out, there was very little information from the federal government other than some initial pandemic guidelines. There wasn't much information out at that point, but there's been some new information that's come out. I'd like to read some of that and read the kind of the cover letter that was submitted in reference to that. I also want to follow up on this CDC internal emails memo that was issued last time. There, in doing some further research, there was some significant problems with the CDC COVID testing as when it first came out. And I don't know how much the public is aware of that, or whether or not, I don't remember that being included in detail in the prior committee report, but I thought it might be useful to talk to this a little bit. So I'd like to just present this issues with CDC COVID-19 testing. It is a summary of 6 different articles that were available in 2020 up through 2022, but they were not cited in the previous report. The first one is from August 18, 2022, the CDC director acknowledges mistakes to staff in an internal message. So this, the CDC director, Rochelle Walensky, stated that the CDC was quote, responsible for some pretty dramatic, pretty public mistakes from testing to data to communications. Issues included it takes too long for the CDC to publish its data and science for decision making. Of course, that can have a huge impact in a pandemic situation. Its guidance is, quote, confusing and overwhelming, and there was also a high staff turnover. The second is a NBC News dated October 1st, 2022. It's an article of how the CDC's communication failures during COVID tarnished the agency. So the Health and Human Services September 1st, 2022 report on the CDC's pandemic response called for the CDC to move more quickly and reliably, and drastic changes were being called for the CDC by the Health and Human Services Agency, the U.S. Federal Health and Human Services Agency. And in interviews with 7 CDC employees, errors were acknowledged, including the first COVID tests were faulty at an error rate of up to 33%. CDC communication of advice was summed up as do what you think best due to the lack of data and concrete scientific studies to obtain answers wherever there was lack of data. So again, there was a lack of a standard scientific practice and analysis by the CDC, and the communication became rather haphazard. There's also flip-flopping on advice for wearing masks, testing for COVID, and explanations as to how the virus spreads. Again, I think this is because there was a lack of data, and so they were, in some cases, making it up as they went along, apparently. They also there was an inability to supply data in real time. So that was that article. By the way, in an email sent to all of the committee, there's a zip file containing all of these articles in case you want to read through those yourself. I've tried to provide some summaries. So improvements to communicate. The next article is from Political, 17 August 2022. CDC director orders agency overhaul admitting flawed COVID-19 response. So basically they cited that improvements for communication were needed, changed the incentivization from published research in scientific journals to research and data aimed at public health policy and action. So there was more interest in publications than in actual health policy to the citizens. And then also more staff training to respond to public health emergencies. I was thinking about this morning, and what has changed in particular with the healthcare system in New Hampshire just since the pandemic. And I don't know how it is in each of your communities, but we've seen, at least in Hudson and the greater Nashua area, an extensive kind of pop-up of urgent care facilities, as well as a new kind of satellite ER facility from one of the two main hospitals in Nashua. So I think that's whatever was incorporated into the pandemic response was not probably back in 2021 and 2022, 2020 as well, I suppose, probably did not take into account urgent care facilities and these satellite ERs that I believe we just passed some legislation for. So, Representative Polozov.
I have a question on previous topic on changing from the incentivization from published research to some research and data aimed at public health policy. So could you give me some example how this change would look like in practice?
Right. So if someone so say a researcher at the CDC was working on some data aspect, they were looking more to write the article rather than to write an actual policy saying, what does this data tell us about how we should handle this situation in a public health care crisis? So, for example, they might have been more interested in reporting. Let's say they were waiting to accumulate. I don't know, for example, so I'm doing a hypothetical, which is always dangerous, but suppose there were some statements about comorbidities. That's a good topic because there was a lot of misunderstanding. At first, there was the actual data shows that really the people who were dying from COVID had not only COVID, but a multiple of comorbidities. So diabetes or respiratory diseases or other things like that that would affect the respiratory capabilities of the individual. But that was not reported clearly initially. There was much more reporting that generally people were dying at certain, and they were really stating it by demographics of age rather than doing a deeper dive and actually explaining that no, the deaths were really coming to individuals who had multiple comorbidities that made their immune systems more vulnerable and stuff. I remember very clearly a statement on Bill Maher made at one point on one of his TV shows. It just struck me so profoundly was that he said that there was a strong belief by much of the population that COVID had a 50% death rate. And that, instead of really a very small percent death rate, but a high death rate for people with comorbidities. And so that added to the panic, that added to, I think, the use of mandates and emergency measures when perhaps they were not called for. And therefore it, I think, made the public more generally, this is not as much the case in New Hampshire perhaps, but generally the public was much more panicked about COVID than they needed to be. All right. So did that answer your question? Okay. Very good. let me go to the remaining three articles. I'll go over those real quickly, and um, and then we'll get into some other some couple of other documents, and then some further statements here. So there was another NPR report dated 06 November 2020. Officials knew the coronavirus test was flawed, but released it anyway. So uh, this is sort of an interesting note, is that an incorrect assignment was made for the person to run the COVID laboratory within CDC. As background, there are 7 major types of respiratory viruses: influenza, respiratory syncytial, parainfluenza, metapneumovirus, rhinovirus, coronaviruses, adenoviruses, and bocaviruses or noroviruses. So a lot of different types of viruses. But the person who was in charge of developing the COVID-19 test was an expert in influenzas, not the coronavirus. And consequently, the test relied on a virus closer to influenza than the respiratory virus closer to the coronavirus. So that initial quality control testing was used an incorrect emergency use authorization procedure and protocol. And when the correct procedure was used, so they used the wrong protocol because of the wrong virus. In using that wrong protocol, they thought that the test kits were relatively good, meaning that the failure rate would have been well under 5%. Instead, when the correct quality control procedure was used, a 33% failure rate was discovered. So, and even once it was discovered, they released the test kits anyway. And they did not establish a benchmark for acceptance. So there are a lot of quality control and quality assurance failures and assignments, management failures, because they assigned the wrong subject matter experts to the problem. So that's what that NPR report says. There's a Reuters January 22nd, 2021 report, how the US CDC missed chances to spot COVID's silent spread. So they missed opportunities to study detained or quarantined asymptomatic populations exposed to coronavirus, but elected not to have them tested. So again, you get a population, they're exposed to coronavirus. You could then ask to quarantine them, or ask to test them as well, and find out what's the actual transmission rate of the virus. Is it easily transmissible, or not? And they gave examples of 300 Americans being stranded on a Japanese cruise ship. And there was also a disregard for potential cross-contamination with symptomatic people, and a lack of protections for protective gear for the CDC officials themselves. So there would be other chances for cross-contamination during testing. So there are a lot of problems with detecting the spread. And then the final citation here is, there was a summary report issued that had a variety of recommendations that the CDC implemented or is in the process of implementing. The kind of the summary statement behind all this is to say that we heard in our last meeting that the CDC internal emails admit the COVID-19 vaccine risks were never acknowledged publicly, so there was a problem with the suppression of information. This is a problem from the CDC with erroneous information. That's what's being presented today. So again, I think this is driving me to think that one of the recommendations that we need to have coming out of this committee, or at least I would like to propose this as one of the recommendations. We're still months away from this, but that New Hampshire, if we run into a situation again, New Hampshire needs to form resources that can make independent scientific assessments to validate what we have coming from the US government, because we've seen that either errors or suppression of data from just the CDC played a significant role in the pandemic. I'll stop there for any comments or any statements anyone would like to make. If not, I'll keep rolling. All right. The second thing I'd like to do is these 6 articles that I just presented were actually from 22, 21, and 20, and go back several years. More recently, the U.S. Senate has a subcommittee on investigations, and they are currently investigating the U.S. government's actions with the pandemic. This is, at the risk of boring the committee to death, I'm going to actually read the opening statement that Chairman Ron Johnson made before he submitted this report, which is Unmasked How Biden Health Officials Purposely Turned a Blind Eye Toward COVID-19 Vaccine Safety Signals. So I just want to read this in for the record so that people are aware of it. But we've just heard about how the CDC was problematic. We're also going to find out that the FDA and to some degree the NIH as well, National Institutes of Health, and the Food and Drug Administration were not providing sufficient transparency on the data that they had available to them. So this is again from Senator Ron Johnson, who is the chairman of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. In conjunction with this hearing, I am releasing an interim report titled Unmasked: How Biden Health Officials Purposely Turned a Blind Eye Toward COVID-19 Vaccine Safety Signals. I urge everyone tuning into today's hearing to read the full report to determine for yourself how the title is as accurate as it is incriminating. To set the stage for what follows, let me remind everyone that Dr. David Morenz, an advisor to Anthony Fauci, who was recently charged with conspiracy and destruction of records, emailed to colleagues on how to evade Freedom of Information Act requests. Quote, I learned from our FOIA lady here how to make emails disappear, unquote, and how he wanted, quote, correspondence on sensitive issues be sent to me at my Gmail address, unquote. Included in our report is additional evidence of how federal health officials avoided creating a paper trail to prevent transparency and public disclosure. In discussing how they've been warned of a major limitation of FDA's data mining system, one senior FDA official wrote, we should meet internally, many considerations not suited to email. Other federal health officials appeared to have openly acknowledged that they were actively attempting to avoid transparency. A CDC official discussing the sharing of vaccine safety data stated, quote, "I think because of the FOIAs, we may have asked FDA to stop sending these weekly data mining outputs," unquote. In spite of their concerted efforts to conceal what they knew, and when they knew it, the documents we have obtained thanks to Secretary Kennedy's responsiveness to my subpoena and his commitments to radical transparency paint a clear picture of an obvious cover-up by federal health officials. A report shows how FDA officials were warned and fully aware of their safety surveillance system's inability to adjust for a statistical phenomena called masking, which, according to medical researchers, occurs when signals for a vaccine of interest are hidden by the presence of other reported vaccines. Pausing my reading for just a moment. So the scenario that he's talking about is someone has got multiple vaccines. They can attribute a side effect or a serious adverse event to one vaccine but not another, and mask it by not reporting that same serious adverse event to all the vaccines associated with that individual. Continuing from Senator Ron Johnson's statement, rather than use a newer state-of-the-art system which can adjust for masking, Biden health officials purposely chose to employ the older system that concealed the signals for serious adverse events associated with the COVID injection. Throughout 2021, FDA officials received multiple analyses from the state-of-the-art system showing statistically significant safety signals for adverse events, but made a conscious decision to ignore the data. On October 22, 2020, CDC's Tom Shimabukuro touted VAERS by saying it can, quote, rapidly detect safety signals and can detect rare adverse events. VAERS is the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, for those who may not be familiar with that. Continuing. But in an email a year later, when VAERS was reporting worldwide adverse events of 837,595 and 17,619 deaths, Dr. Shimabukuro stated, "It's not a database that should be used for serious surveillance or research," unquote. In reaction to the skyrocketing number of deaths and adverse events, other Biden administration and federal health officials were also publicly denigrating VAERS with comments like, "falsified VAERS report," unquote, quote, "potentially misleading VAERS post," unquote, and, quote, "frequently misused by anti-vaccine activists," unquote, and "conspiracy theorists, science deniers, and anti-vaccine activists can fill out the form," unquote. I'd like to just pause for a second. I didn't bring it today, but I'll make a note to bring it next time that we meet. There has also been recent reporting that social media upregulated positive reports on the use of the vaccine and downregulated by a substantial number the reporting of adverse events experienced from the vaccine. So social media would have brought attention to this, but there were management personnel within the social media who actually downregulated kind of neutral reporting of this, and so that had an impact in the public's perception of what was going on, despite what people were experiencing. Continuing with the reading of Senator Johnson's statement here, the federal health agencies had to be sued twice before a court finally forced them to disclose the results of the V-Safe system, an online self-reporting safety surveillance system created specifically for the mRNA COVID injections. Here's why they fought so hard to keep it from public view. Of the 10 million people who voluntarily provided information to V-Safe, 7.7 sought medical care for COVID injection adverse events, and 25% lost time at work or couldn't perform their daily routine following injection. Even though I wrote 21 letters requesting information on what the agencies were tracking and what they knew about adverse events, I didn't need a sophisticated mathematical model to tell me the COVID injection was causing significant harm. The data depicted in these charts alone should have raised the alert level to DEFCON 1. And then the statement has two charts. One is entitled Vaccine-Related Deaths for all vaccines as of April 21st, 2026. And you can see that when the COVID vaccines start being widely distributed, that the graph was prior to that well below 1,000 when the COVID vaccine were being distributed. The worldwide deaths rose to over 20,000. And in 2021, 2022, it was approximately 12,000, approximately 3,000 in 2023. 2024 would have been about 1,000 and half that again in 2025. The second graph that is presented is entitled Drug Adverse Event Comparison, FDA and CDC Data Worldwide, and it reports the adverse events and deaths per year. And you have a number of different proposed treatments. So you have ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, flu vaccines, dexamethasone, and acetaminophen, and remdesivir. And you see that the adverse events and deaths per year for both remdesivir and COVID are incredibly high. Those two are being monitored for a period of about 66 months for remdesivir and 65 months for the COVID vaccines. And you have adverse events of over 10,000, almost 11,000 for remdesivir, and COVID vaccines of over 1,675,000. And deaths close to 3,000 and for remdesivir, and for COVID vaccines just over 39,000. And that is in contrast to decades of use for ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, flu vaccines, dexamethasone, and acetaminophen having far less adverse events and deaths, so that the deaths per year are huge by comparison. So, all right, so continuing with the statement. In spite of these shocking numbers, federal health officials continue to recommend the injection, claiming it is both safe and effective. By comparison, in 1976, after approximately 25 to 30 deaths and over 500 cases of Guillain-Barré syndrome, the swine flu vaccine was pulled from the market. Biden federal health officials were clearly not as vigilant in reacting to what VAERS was showing. For over 4 years, I have wondered how health officials could possibly ignore this overwhelming evidence of harm. Now I know. Our report details that on March 1st, 2021, less than 3 months after the COVID injections received an emergency use authorization, Peter Marks, the head of CBER, and officials reporting to him were warned by FDA's Dr. Anna Sarsman, an individual who these officials recognize as an expert in FDA's data mining, that the current system would mask safety signals for COVID injection adverse events. Dr. Sarsman proposed a new method invented by Dr. William Dumichel of Oracle, the inventor of the current algorithm, to uncover the hidden safety signals. On March 22nd, 2021, Dr. Sarsman sent Dr. Dumochel's data analysis to senior FDA officials showing that the new analytical method found 49 examples of extreme masking and uncovered approximately 25 statistically significant safety signals of adverse events associated with the COVID injection, including sudden cardiac death, Bell's palsy, and pulmonary infarction. And there's a list that is presented on the next page, page 5 of 6 in his statement, and it goes through, I would say, close to 50 different types of events that were detected using this new system. 3 more paragraphs to read from Senator Johnson's statement, then this will be concluded here. Our report goes on to detail how federal officials refused to acknowledge these revelations or take action to warn the public. Instead, senior FDA officials repeatedly tried to stop Dr. Sarsman from continuing her work or communicating her findings outside of FDA. Again, the suppression, if I can make a comment there. In September 2021, Dr. Marks informed Dr. Patrizia Cavazzoni, the then director of CDER, that's the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research in FDA, that Dr. Sarsman, who was a CDER employee, has been asked to, quote, cease and desist conducting her data analyses. Dr. Marks complained that Dr. Sarsman's work had become a major distraction, quote, become a major distraction, unquote, and that her efforts could, quote, create erroneous conflicts that feed into anti-vaccination rhetoric, unquote. Dr. Peter Stein, the then director of CDER's Office of New Drugs, reported to Dr. Marks that his office had made it clear to Dr. Sarsman that, quote, she should not be discussing or providing internal analyses externally and needs to focus on her assigned work, unquote. Dr. Sarsman, who retired from FDA in 2025 after more than 35 years of service, told PSI staff in a recent, that would be the PSI being the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation staff, in a recent interview that she believed her FDA colleagues saw her as a, quote, pest and persona non grata because she was raising concerns about masking. And then our witnesses today are medical researchers and experts in scientific data collection. They will help clarify the masking issue and describe why this cover-up was so egregious. I want to thank them for their time and effort that they put into their testimony. I also want to thank Secretary Kennedy, for his commitment to radical transparency and for promising to make the HHS personnel with knowledge of these events available for interviews with the subcommittee. So, I think since everyone is seeing this report, I think for the first time, we won't dig into this report today, but I would ask for everybody to take this as a reading assignment and to think about what kind of questions we want to raise to our public health officials and what concerns we might have with how New Hampshire will respond in the face of errors and suppression of data as clearly seen in the CDC, FDA. So, Representative Wheeler, you have a comment or question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the purposes of the public who's listening in, I just wanted to let them know that the committee assistant will be putting these into the record, and so they'll be attached to the committee record available on the House website for anyone to watch or listen for any of the different information that's available here for us.
Thank you, Representative Wheeler. That's an important point. I know it's very possible that some social media suppression is continuing, and that this may not have. I find this to be a startling and striking statement and report, and I don't believe many people have heard of it, unfortunately. Let us. I would recommend everybody read this. This is only a few weeks old, and it's still highly relevant to what we need to do. And I think it's actually an important finding for this special committee to consider. And I think this shows the wisdom of Speaker Packard to continue the special committee and to allow us to dig into this, especially as more information is coming out. So I deeply appreciate the speaker's willingness to continue this committee. With that, I would like to call upon Representative Polozov. You have proposed for the committee a communication from the committee, and I'd like for you to take a few moments to introduce that. We won't be. I just want to state up front, we won't be acting on this today. What we need to do is collect information that substantiates it. I actually believe this report substantiates some of the recommendations in Representative Polozov's statement here that he's proposed for us to consider. But I think we should get the data that's available and supplement this to for this statement. My goal would be that because of the urgency of the situation, I believe that the special committee should get this statement out by the end of June, and so that in our future meetings in June, we will be taking this up with particular interest. So please, Representative Polozov, if you could introduce what you've offered as a draft statement, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And first, I want to thank you for documents you introduced today. Your last two pieces are from our federal investigative efforts, and we know that sometimes representatives on federal level are even more partisan than we are here in New Hampshire, but these papers you introduced, they're based on real facts, on real documents discovered from FDA and CDC, and the problems are not limited just, for example, for what was happening under Biden, and as we discovered, it's some of this so-called COVID response is still happening in New Hampshire with these recommendations of COVID-19 vaccines to certain groups that don't actually need it. And I also want to thank you that your previous submission included an article about year 2020 and the test that had 33% failure rate, and that was not under Biden. So we are not partisan here. We are looking into facts, and I want to thank you for being impartial in that way.
That's an excellent point. We are we want to make a bipartisan effort to present this and find fault wherever fault lays or resides. So that is a good point. Thank you.
Yeah. So in terms of acting on the documents, some were submitted today. We were meeting 2 times this year, and also I want to thank previous members of Special Committee on COVID Response Efficacy and the previous report issued by this committee that put groundwork for what I'm trying to do. So as I stated in last meetings, it's concerning that our state switched from from recommending COVID vaccine to kids to not recommending. But now that there are some changes on federal level, they switched to AAP schedule to recommending it again for kids under 2 years old. So here I'm proposing a draft request for emergency action to reverse that recommendation and first three items. If we recommend some medications, so from medical freedom view, we want informed consent and why people take medications, because it's needed, it's effective, and it's not too risky to take it in terms of side effects. So first of all, do children need some special protection from COVID? From early on in pandemic, we saw that this virus target more elderly and people with comorbidities, and children generally is not demographic who needs it. So that first one. Second, is it effective? And early on, there was statement, including from U.S. President administration around 2021 that the vaccine stops transmission, but unfortunately, creating a vaccine for highly mutative coronaviruses, it's very hard, and this time it also didn't work too well. Virus is mutating, and these vaccines demonstrated very limited efficacy, and some studies even show negative efficacy on different levels. And the third one we already started discussing today is a risk of serious side effects, and that's self-explanatory, like risks here obviously overweight the benefit. And then I go on in some details. For example, one of the reasons why at some point our New Hampshire state officials in the HHS stopped recommending COVID vaccine is that at some point they finally admitted that it does cause increased myocarditis, especially in males under 18 years old. So, but there are other serious side effects that maybe not as widely distributed to the public, and that's to the point that we were discussing with Representative Way, is that sometimes we have incentives for published research, so we can find those research about strokes, about potential cancerogenity of COVID vaccines, but this data is not delivered to public, but public health experts who communicate recommendations for New Hampshire. So I see this gap. So even Politico was talking about in 2022, in 2026 in New Hampshire, it's not solved, but that's why I outlined it here to do action. So it's a draft, but it's based on what we discussed previously. I would be happy if one or two of you will join me in like. So one thing we need like to cross check as a representative where I suggested it would be good to have some supportive footnotes or more detailed documentation attached. And yes, so here we are.
Very good. Thank you very much. I do think that this is a great first draft. I think it points out the concerns nicely. There's a demographic that is barely affected by COVID-19, and yet they're being asked to vaccinate that group. It's not understood why they would be asked to do that when there's been data that suggests that the efficacy of preventing transmission is suspect, and that also, as we just heard in the statement from Senator Johnson, that there are a number of SAEs associated with this that they've now detected. I would also make two comments. I've heard data. I don't have the evidence in front of me, but there's two other concerns here that I think are well worth noting, and I need to do some research on following that. One is the impact that the mRNA technology is actually having on the generation of these adverse events. There's a great concern that because of this is a novel technology and has not been studied for decades in the use of human vaccines, that there's really not sufficient evidence about its long-term impacts. And we already know from studies and testimonies that we heard in that were heard in the House Health and Human Services and Elderly Affairs Committee that there are a number of vaccines out there that have been monitored for only a few days or a few months rather than a long duration, so that long-term side effects are not well documented or understood for vaccines. And because of that, I would have a similar concern for the mRNA COVID-19 vaccine. So that's one thing, that mRNA technology. The second thing is that the safety studies that were done, and I'm not sure if I read this in Senator Johnson's report or if I heard this elsewhere, because I've been looking at a lot of data, so I apologize for not being able to pinpoint the exact source yet, but I will get this, is that the safety profiles of these were relative safety profiles. What does that mean? So an absolute safety profile would be the comparison of a placebo against a drug or vaccine. A relative safety profile is one drug product versus another, or a vaccine versus another similar vaccine. The only problem with that is if you have a high serious adverse event rate for the original vaccine and you have a second vaccine and you compare it to and you say, okay, well, the relative, if they both had, let's say, 1,000 of a very serious adverse event, and they both had 1,000 and 1,000, you could say of the other one, well, in a relative safety study, it was only 1% different from this. 110 serious adverse events versus 1,000 adverse events. Well, that sounds relative, relative safety sounds great. I mean, it sounds like, oh, it's not that bad. But the absolute safety is horrific. So, and I think that is how they've been reporting some of the safety associated with these mRNA COVID-19 vaccines. So, I again, I need to find the exact data source. I need to bring that to this committee and make sure that we include that as something substantiating what Representative Polozov has proposed here. I would propose that we, again, look at this, get data, and then at a future meeting in June, we come back and we amend this as needed, if needed, but substantiate it with our research, and then we present it to um, uh, the appropriate people. So thank you for that. Any other comments? All right. I would like to go over just one other thing, just a thought process here. So I'm not sure if because the timing for our committee has been impacted by the large number of bills that the House and Senate proposed this particular second year of the term. And so we were not able to meet prior to really mid-May. We may have some challenges getting in people in to testify in June, especially now that, but what I would propose is that we could do some offline work in setting up people for uh, public testimonies to this committee in the September and very early October timeframe. Just get them all planned out and lined up so that they're ready. That would still give us enough time to finish the report by late October prior to the elections. Along those lines, we should be thinking about what are the questions we want to ask, what we want to implement. For instance, Representative Litchfield, you mentioned the nursing homes, as I recall. So we should think carefully, and I would propose that this is another thing that we can come up with over the next few weeks, is what are the questions we want to ask to the witnesses who will be appearing before us in the future. So, for nursing homes, it might be, what physical or operational changes were made because of the COVID, and what is the current pandemic response that you would implement if another one were to happen. So what, and then just asking about the different components in terms of resources, in terms of staffing, facility changes. How was the communication to the nursing homes? And that's another thing in our 2024 report. One of the attachments was the COVID-19 after action report. I would again recommend everybody read this and consider, okay, here's what was done in New Hampshire. Does this prepare us sufficiently well for the next pandemic, assuming there will be one? So I want to think about that. I know Representative Gerard mentioned the EMTs as well, thinking about what we would need to do for them. So I think I would task everybody, if you named a particular concern, task yourself with coming up, all right, what are the questions that we need to ask these individuals if we brought in some people from EMTs or directors of nursing homes or directors of hospitals. I'd like to get some of our main hospitals in New Hampshire to come in and comment on that as well. And we should also ask again our very important agency of Health and Human Services in New Hampshire to also comment as well. And in coming up with those questions, I would also think about what data do you need to justify changes that might need to be made. So think in terms about the data necessary to justify what we want to ask about. Because the goal is to protect New Hampshire and to have us prepared in the event. We're not, we hope that this never happens again, but we want to be prepared. It seems, the hantavirus was momentarily thought to be the next pandemic, but quickly reasonable heads came together and saw that that was just alarmist. And therefore, we should be safe from that, but we do want to be prepared in the future and make sure that New Hampshire is in a position to respond efficiently, effectively, and something that will serve well the citizens of New Hampshire. I don't have anything else on my particular agenda for today, other than determining the next meeting date. Yeah. Oh, yes, I didn't. Go ahead, Representative Polizov.
I guess I have one request. I will try to do it myself, but if anyone can help, I see some national level statistics on how post-COVID certain trends developing in diseases like in cancer, certain cancer rates, how they so some noticeable growth nationally, and some other diseases. But it would be interesting to see if we have any post 2020 statistics for New Hampshire as well coming and showing us either way.
Yes, I did reach out to Vital Statistics in the Secretary of State's department. They actually directed me back to Department of Health and Human Services as having those statistics. So I will be following up with them. I'll see if we can get them in before June. That might be possible, but it might not be. We might have to wait until September. But I do think that's an excellent question. Have the cancer rates increased in New Hampshire since 2020? What does that look like? I think there are some other, if we do some research, we can also ask perhaps some more targeted questions as to look for other particular signals that people are now finding out on a national level. We can ask if they are occurring within New Hampshire. So great suggestion. Thank you, Representative Polizov. All right. So looking ahead, we will try and have a meeting on Thursday, June 11th. And so we will. There will be an announcement going out for Thursday, June 11th. We will plan on meeting here at 10 o'clock. Same same time, same place. But Thursday, June 11th. That because of everybody's schedule. I'm trying to select dates that are maximize participation. There's also I'll try and make a decision about we're considering the dates of June 17th, June 18th, or June 19th. There's really multiple people not available on June 19th. So I know that will not be, we will not choose that. We will choose either June 17th or June 18th, Wednesday or Thursday. I'll try and make a decision about that within the next few days and let the committee know. And then we'll have one final meeting on Wednesday, June 24th. And we will try to I know Representative Wheeler, you have some commitments and won't be able to make it. I apologize for scheduling this late in the month of June, but
Well, we have cameras and microphones, so I can watch it online.
very good. Thank you for your enthusiasm and diligent follow-up. Much appreciated. So I think we have a goal of trying to turn this suggestion by Representative Polozov into a deliverable by the end of June. I would also note, I may have forgotten to mention this earlier, I've noticed that there are some states who may actually be suing the CDC and the FDA, and I need to, over COVID and what was done, I need to follow up with that. If they are doing that, it would be perhaps pertinent and relevant for this committee to suggest the same to our Attorney General as well, to either join a lawsuit or to file one of our own, and so that we can actually understand again, if people were not, imagine the horrible position that this puts our Department of Health and Human Services in New Hampshire. They're trying to make assessments of the data that they have available to them, and they're only being given 40% of the data, if that, and none of the safety data. So it would be a very terrible situation to have happen again, where they're getting information, but it's not the information they need to make good decisions on behalf of the state of New Hampshire. So I think we need to see if we need to join, if these are occurring, as I think I've heard, we need to follow up on that and figure out what we should do. So, and I think possibly the result being a recommendation to the Attorney General. All right. Yes, Representative Polozov.
I fully support your last point, but on previous point of scheduling, I wonder if we could ask committee assistant about scheduling for Thursday 11th. I wonder if it's too late, if we need proper notice in calendar. Are we still able to schedule for next Thursday, or are we too late at this point?
Yes, our research assistant is happy to. Our research assistant is happy to provide some information. Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Representative, for the question. The chair brought that to me before the meeting started. From what House Committee Services, the team was able to look at it, and we believe that the scheduling for this would fall under House Rule 44, Section C, which is all other committee or subcommittee meetings at which decisions are made or information is received shall be advertised in the House calendar, or if scheduled after the calendar deadline, shall be posted in the clerk's office and outside the committee room at least 24 hours prior to the meeting. So, is our understanding that that is what the clerk would allow in this situation.
Thank you.
Of course.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Allen. So, with that, I think we will plan to meet on Thursday, June 11th, and I will try and be much more timely for the June 17th and June 18th and June 20th. Deciding between those two dates and the June 24th date. I'll make sure those get timely announced so that they go into the House calendar accordingly. Again, I apologize to anyone who may have been caught off guard for the June 11th meeting, but hopefully they'll be made aware of it or can look it up online as needed. So with that, I just want to go around the room and see if there are any further comments. Representative Wheeler, any further comments for today? All right, thank you. Representative Litchfield, any further comments for today?
May I just ask you a couple of questions, please? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I held back because I figured in going through the paperwork, maybe I would find some of these answers. But I'm thinking if I have the questions, maybe the public has the questions as well. When you had mentioned earlier that there was the failure rate of the COVID test by 30%, do you happen to have any idea whether that was leaning toward false positive or false negative?
That's a great question. I believe, as I remember it, to be false positive, but I will do my homework and come back to you on what exactly that was. I think it was a false positive. So, in case the public doesn't know, a false positive is when you take a test, you don't have the virus, but it registers you as having the virus. A false negative is when you take the test, you have the virus, but it says that you don't have the virus. So I think it was leaning toward false positives, but I will double check that and come back to you. Great question.
Thank you. I have one more, but
please.
I think is that right? Sorry.
Yes, Representative Polozov.
Yeah, as far as I understand, false positives were a huge concern, and they were definitely later detected that it was a concern. But also, some tests did have false negative problem, and for example, for some, there are different technologies and different tests, and for some technologies, it was said if you just got symptoms like first day, that specific test might not show that you have COVID. So as far as I remember, some tests also had false negative problem as well.
So that's more in the timing, correct? Yeah. How far along you are in the illness and having taken the test?
Yeah, there were also, as if I remember correctly, I'm doing this from memory, but there were also problems using the PCR testing, polymers chain reaction testing PCR, and what PCR does is it basically, it's like, this is an oversimplification, but it basically replicates the material so that you have sufficient material to then test. And so, so it makes copies, if you will. But the problem is that if you make more than a certain number of copies, it starts degrading a bit. And so you then, it's like the old Xerox machines where you would, the mimeograph paper fades over time kind of thing. And so as it's being replicated that much for additional testing, then to detect a signal, then you get a bad reading or a false reading because it's really not meant to go to that many cycles of that chain reaction there. False positive or false negative, we'll research that and get back to you on that great question. You had another question? Representative Litchfield,
I do, please, yes. The other question that I had was, I understand that we're trying to be objective, so my question might be a little subjective, but you had mentioned that it was reported that there was a belief out there in the public that there was I believe you said a 50% mortality rate with COVID. Do we have a good feel for where did that come from? Was that media messaging? Was that just hysteria, people misunderstanding, or have they been able to just kind of get a handle on that?
That's a great question. Thank you for that question. I don't know. I do remember. I think it's on YouTube or online. I'll actually try to get the exact video clip where it's Bill Maher, a popular television host, who was quoted as saying that he, in talking with people he knew, and he found that many people felt that they had that COVID, the disease itself, had a 50% mortality rate, and so I don't know what the origin of that is, but we did also briefly discuss, or I touched upon it, was that there was some downregulation of reporting of adverse events from the vaccine. There was some upregulating of vaccine usage for COVID, if I remember correctly, and or encouragement to take the vaccine. It's possible that that same sort of upregulation or downregulation occurred in the reporting of deaths for COVID as well. So it's a great question, again, part of the whole communication package that we need to understand. And I'll look into that. But again, I welcome anyone on the committee to look into that.
It's just, I would say, of huge importance, because I know at the time, for example, when we were trying to open up the schools, at that point in time, the figures that we had, the statistics showed that there was a 99.99% survival rate of the youth, and yet we were still shutting down the schools. So that's interesting to me. If the public actually had a perception of a 50% mortality rate, well, sure, that's exactly why they didn't want the schools. So it's just interesting to me, and I want to know how we can prevent something like that from happening in the future. I have one more, but I know that there's another representative that has a question.
So thank you. I think that's important for understanding the mandates from Governor Sununu that shut down schools, businesses, churches, a number of things. And again, New Hampshire was remarkably resilient and reopened many of those, but there were a few school districts where the governor had to intervene, or
Yes.
people under the governor had to intervene in order to force those places to reopen. And so the communication of relevant data played an important part into those mandates, and we should follow up. I encourage you to research it yourself, but I will also research it. Representative Polzov, you had a comment on this?
Yeah, it's. I appreciate the comment about closing the schools based on perception, and definitely mass media reporting played a great role in creating this false perception, as well as politicians, because politicians, they tend both create impression but also act on impression from people, and this committee was recommending acting based on scientific data, objective data. So that's, I think, ultimate solution, or at least partial solution we should strive to. And generally, our brains are not wired to uh, assess things like probability correctly. Like if we heard that the white sharks can attack people on New England beaches, people tend to overestimate a chance of attacks by white sharks, and maybe they don't even consider that they could be bitten by bluefish because it's not in the they didn't hear about it, or even like just driving to a beach and dying in an accident probably have much higher probability, but it's not how our brains are wired, and that's why we need science and independent researchers giving us good data to act upon.
Yes, thank you for that comment. It is worth noting that beach vacations diminished significantly following the showing of Jaws.
Jaws.
So if we take that as evidence in support of Representative Polozov's statement, there I think we can certainly make that analogy for Representative Litchfield's concerns about that. So again, thank you. I think that's perception, social media, and the understanding of the impact, the true impact, certainly plays into closures and mandates, and it's better that we understand that. So, thank you.
Well, I was, as we were discussing this too, it occurred to me that there was also a lead health official that the governor had leaned on that was at all of these press conferences as well. I would be curious to find out how that doctor had received his information as well. Do you know what I'm saying? That may be in the 2024 report. I haven't read it as yet.
Was that that was most likely, I would guess, Dr. Chan
It
from
was,
the
it was,
Health and
yes.
Human Services. So
Yes.
that's a great question. I'm not sure. We could certainly ask him that question, because I think I'd have to go back and look at the report. I'm not sure how much we explored that, but having said that, I'm not sure how much we knew the level of data suppression and data down and social media downregulation and other things like that at that point. And so there may have been an underlying false assumption that they were getting accurate information and were not acting on it. And if they were getting really bad, quote, scientific information, thought they were acting correctly on that information they were receiving, and yet based on our having constituents come to us and telling us about a very different story, that would explain a lot of the for lack of a better word, bewilderment by the previous 2024 special committee as to why certain people were taking positions that they did. So I think this is a great question to follow up. We should make sure that we address that.
And I think I don't mean to speak for the committee, but I would believe, I think that we're all not looking to play in regard to this Monday morning quarterback in a gotcha fashion. We're looking to learn for the future and to make it better. Do you know what I'm saying? This is all meant with the best of intentions.
Yes, that anyone who would read the 2024 report would hopefully have that same sort of opinion. We are not interested in playing gotcha, and I will immediately discourage any of that sort of approach. Our approach is simply to find better solutions for the state of New Hampshire, and some of that may be, understanding what was done wrong, but as we're discovering, especially in the last two meetings when we've discovered how there was errors and clear data suppression at the federal level, and that clearly inaccurate information was being given to the states, that raises a major concern, and I think I think the greatest challenge that this committee has, at least in my mind, I don't mean to speak for the committee. In my mind, this is the greatest challenge. How do we, as an independent state, set up the mechanisms to validate what data we're receiving from the federal government, especially in this area? So I think it based on just what we've reviewed in the past couple of weeks, this is already one of the recommendations that I see the special committee potentially making, is that we must consider how New Hampshire can independently assess the data that's being received.
Well, I think too that we're going to find that the more we learn, the more we know, we realize actually how little we know. For example, we're talking about how the federal government provided information to New Hampshire, whether it was accurate, not accurate, suppressed or not, but about the international community. I understand that's beyond the scope, but I'm just saying that we don't know what the international community was feeding to the federal government, which may have skewed what they were sharing with us as well, which may not be the purview of this committee, but I'm just saying, realistically speaking, it may have adversely impacted things.
Yes, that we should consider that also. There are some, just as each of the states is its own little independent experiment, as the framers of our Constitution envisioned. Each state has its own sort of has its own independence and can do certain things its own way, and so we see different states practicing different things and getting different results. We see that economically. We see that in other kind of policy decisions. Likewise, there are countries who took very different approaches to COVID-19. The nation of Israel was fully vaccinated multiple times. The nation of Sweden had no vaccination. And so, and I don't know offhand what the data from those two nations is. But I know I spoke, my job when I'm not working here is a consultant, and I do audits of different companies so during the pandemic I audited both companies in Israel and Sweden, and worked with both of them, and they both seemed fine. So I, in my very limited sampling and very limited interactions with nationals from those countries, I couldn't tell any difference. And so that's kind of an interesting observation in and of itself. But maybe there's some national data we can evaluate, and that's I think the clearest example. Japan was highly vaccinated. That might be another one to look at to evaluate where things are going. Thank you for your questions. Representative Polizov. I feel like a table tennis match.
I'm sorry about that.
So I may have to.
Maybe you should sit
We
up
may spread
together.
out, yeah, we may have to scatter everyone a little bit, so.
Yeah, I want to address page 3 in the opening statement.
From Senator Johnson's
uh,
statement. Okay,
on the
yes.
bottom, the line about remdesivir. So the previous question about um, international bodies. So uh, in previously, this committee looked into uh, role of China and international organizations like World Health Organization, and a lot of the recommendations I would view as negative, and that's why of the reason why this legislature was considering distancing, and our federal government was considering distancing from those organizations. But on third line from the bottom, you can see remdesivir and um, uh, additional 499 deaths per year. As far as I understand, it was well known from its research, I believe, on Ebola, that there are some severe side effects from these medications, and um, as it was rolled out by hospitals during the COVID, we saw a spike in deaths with cause of death acute kidney failure. That is one of the known side effects of remdesivir. But actually, that was one case that I know when international bodies were actually urging US to reconsider our policies on remdesivir because it didn't make sense for them. How long our hospitals were keeping people on this aggressive medication that, according to the international knowledge, was harmful. And there was an additional concern that remdesivir, if it works at all, it should work in early stages of COVID. But by the time people were getting into hospitals, they were already like sometimes a week or two into the disease, and the early virus proliferation, it was too late time to stop that. So even administration of this antiviral at all was questionable. So it's a mixed bag with international bodies. There was was one case with remdesivir where that are available to me, like the recommendation made some sense, but often it didn't. But yeah, it's something to consider. Thank you for your question.
I will, yeah, I'll make a brief comment. I think it's very important to remember in any of these treatments, there is, as you said, timing with respect to the life cycle of the disease. There is there's a therapeutic window that every drug has between a minimum dose that has no efficacy and a maximum dose that has a toxic threshold. And so it's very possible that if a drug is given in a 1 week cycle, it could be very therapeutic and not reaching the toxicity levels that might be of concern. If it's given for a second dosing cycle, where it might reach those toxicity levels and then cause more harm than good. And I'm not sure, it would be interesting to maybe explore that for that particular thing. I will say, so I'll just share my own personal experience with COVID. I had COVID induced pneumonia. My oxygen levels were down to 70%. And my wife took me into the hospital. I was in the ICU for 9 days. I had 1 dose of remdesivir, but not a second dose. And after 9 days, I got out of the ICU and then was in whatever follows that. And was able to go home after 2 weeks, I think. So it's important that I think we help the public to understand some of these concepts. If possible, it would be important to help, because I know there are some concerns about remdesivir. On the other hand, another drug that's on this same very page is ivermectin, and if ivermectin is administered too late in the life cycle of the disease, it won't have a sufficient effect. Or if it's administered in the wrong dosing levels, it will not have. It can have a toxic effect. I've taken hydroxychloroquine a number of times in trips to India, and never had any side effect. But they always warn you that you can't take it too long because of the risk of vision issues, and you get blurred vision or double vision. I worked with some consultants who had just done too much, and they actually got had some adverse events related to vision issues with hydroxychloroquine, but only because they had taken it too long. So again, the number of cycles that a drug is dosed, that therapeutic window between the toxicity level and the minimum level to be effective, and then the life cycle of the disease are all parameters that I think the public needs to understand better to evaluate how they do informed consent, quite frankly. So, Representative Polizon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I aligned it with also one of previous questions, like what guides our state epidemiologist in his recommendation of DHHS. And over the years, this legislature were asking similar questions to Dr. Chen and other officials, and I think there's no like a single answer. Like sometimes they were relying on CDC, now they switch to AAP. In terms of like why hospitals were forcing people on intubation or prescribing remdesivir so aggressively, like some of those recommendations were based on, I'm spacing on the names, but there are some other bodies, national bodies similar to some associations that develop recommendations, for example, for hospitals in certain situations. So I think my impression is that there's no like a single answer, and sometimes our DHHS officials can choose between different federal or national bodies, different organizations providing different policies, but we definitely can try to dig into it, but there might not be a simple answer to that question.
Thank you, Representative. That's an excellent point. That is another line of inquiry that we need to pursue. Any other questions, Yes.
Hopefully my last one, and I can research this myself. It's just if you all know off the top of your head, it's easier. But in this sheet that we have today with the drug adverse event comparison, and it mentions adverse events, deaths per year, and you had quoted the adverse events for the COVID vaccine at 1.6 million. I'm just curious how, when the FDA and CDC are configuring this data or this chart, ultimately these figures, how did they tie back the deaths to these particular meds or vaccines?
So that's a good question. The FDA and other countries have adverse events reporting systems,
Yes.
and so they would report it in through those agencies. So I think at the very bottom in very tiny letters they have the FDA AEMS system. I believe that is adverse events. I'm not sure what the M stands for, quite frankly, but I'll research that and find out particularly. Then the CDC VAERS, a vaccine adverse events reporting system, and then other reports from all locations worldwide. And this was data downloaded from 2026. I believe in the footnotes that are provided, there might be some indication in the footnotes provided in the statement from Senator Johnson, there might be some possible sources where that's found. If not, they are probably contained within the report itself, and so we can look for that and follow up with that. But that's a great question. Where does this data come from? It comes from FDA and CDC itself. So
I was curious because I thought, depending upon the population that we're talking about, or the demographic, the age group, let's say it's under the age of 2, maybe they might be there for their routine vaccine. So maybe on the same day they receive the COVID vaccine and, let's say, rotavirus or DTaP or something like that. But then in an elderly population, maybe they received COVID vaccine, flu vaccine, and or shingles. Or so I was curious how they tied it back to these particular, you know what I mean, or you know what I mean, were they taking the ivermectin at the same time as the acetaminophen or something like that? So that's how I was curious how they tied it all back.
So part of the, without getting into the weeds too much, part of the adverse events reporting systems also ask for concomitant medications. So medications that are being taken at the same time. So they would include, they would ask the individual or the reporting physician would know the other drugs that were being administered, other vaccines that had been administered, and would therefore, hopefully, in order to get better data, accurately report all of the concomitant medications or vaccines that were taken at that same time that might have a causal effect or an associated related effect. So,
Thank you.
good question. All right. I gave Representative Wheeler, Representative Litchfield a chance for final comments. Representative Polozov, any final comments? All set. Thank you. And then Representative Gerard. All right. All right. Yes, hit the gavel quick. Great suggestion. All right. With that, then I will close today's committee meeting. I want to thank again all the members of the committee for coming in for today's meeting in this beautiful day, hot day of June. So again, our next meeting will be Thursday, June 11th, and we will have it then, and I will try and make a decision about the 17th or 18th in the next few days. All right, so thank you all. With that, I will gavel us out.